Hey, Cross of Life, Pastor Caleb here with another Lent devotion in Luke. Today we're looking at Luke chapter 8, verses 26 to 56. I'll give you a paraphrase and then some devotional thoughts. This is the story of Jesus interacting with Legion, who is the set of demons that are inside a man in the Gerasenes. Jesus comes across the Sea of Galilee to this man and encounters him, and the demons inside the man call out to Jesus, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torture me." Jesus commanded the impure spirit to come out of the man, and many times it had seized him, and even though he had been chained hand and foot and kept under guard, he kept breaking the chains. The power of the demons was so strong. Jesus finally asked him, "What is your name?" And he tells him, "Legion," he replied, because many demons had gone into him. They begged Jesus repeatedly not to order them to go into the abyss. So instead, Jesus sends them into a herd of pigs. The pigs run down the hillside and into the Sea of Galilee and drown with the demons inside the pigs. When those tending the pigs saw what happened, they, of course, were not very happy about this because this is a huge cash, I guess, not a cash cow, cash pig. There's a huge financial investment in having pigs. And, of course, all these pigs are now dead. And so even though this amazing thing happened, the people were not happy about it, and some of them were afraid, and so Jesus had to get into the boat and leave. The man who had the demons wanted to go with Jesus, but Jesus told him to return home and tell the people of the city how much God has done for you. As Jesus returns, he meets a man named Jairus, and Jairus comes to Jesus to ask about his daughter, who was 12 and was dying. Jesus goes on his way with Jairus, but as he's doing that, there's a woman who is subject to bleeding, and she comes up and secretly tries to touch Jesus in order to be healed. And Jesus, of course, notices this, and because he feels the power go out from him. But the woman then finally confesses and says, "Okay, it was me." And Jesus says, "Your faith has healed you." While Jesus was speaking, someone tells him that Jairus' daughter actually has died. And so Jesus, normally you would think Jesus would not go with this man anymore, but of course Jesus does the exact opposite. He says, "Don't be afraid, just believe and she will be healed." They go to the house of Jairus, and Peter, James, and John go into the room with Jesus, and Jesus tells the people who are there, who know that the girl is dead, to stop crying. She is not dead, but asleep. And of course, they laugh at him because they don't know that he can do what he can do, but he goes to her and says, "My child, get up." And of course, she does. She rises from the dead. Her parents were astonished, and he told them not to tell anyone what happened. Okay, so that's what happens. A couple devotional thoughts here. I did a whole sermon on this text about the man from the Gerasenes, the legion of demons, when we went through the Mark series, in Mark chapter 5. So if you want to hear me explain the whole text, you can go to my Mark chapter 5 sermon from last year. But one thing I recently heard about this text that was really interesting to me is that this man, of course, wants to go with Jesus after he has been healed. But Jesus tells him to go back to his people. And it is really interesting to me, like when we do experience the amazing grace of God, we very often want to grow closer to Jesus. And that is a fine thing, but we have to understand that the Christian life is a life lived out of love to the neighbor. I think I mentioned this recently in one of my other videos, the difference between piety and pietism. Pietism is being good in order to be a good person. So I, for example, would engage in some spiritual discipline or try to rid my life of a sin simply because I want to be a good person. And that's not inherently a bad thing, but it's misdirected. Piety is being a good person for the sake of other people, which is what Christianity is all about. I mean, Jesus saves us, forgives us, in order that we would be his hands and feet and mouth to this world, to be salt and life in this world. And so when we understand that, we can see that what Jesus says to this man is very normal. He says, "Don't spend so much time worrying about your relationship with me. That's already fixed, right? Now go serve your neighbor." And the interesting thing about this man is that archaeological evidence has shown us that this region of the Gerasenes, or it's called the Decapolis in Mark, is a region of this the Middle East that has a very high density of Christian artwork and buildings and churches and this sort of thing. This is a Gentile area. This is an area that you would not expect to follow Jesus. And yet because of this man sharing his faith, living a life of love to his neighbors in an area that did not know Jesus, it became a stronghold of Christianity during that time. So as we think about this for ourselves, let's remember the way we live out our Christian faith is not just simply identifying with Jesus, but it is living a life of love towards the other people whom God has given us in our lives. Second devotional thought is this idea of your faith. So in the second story here about the woman who comes and touches Jesus, Jesus says, "Your faith has healed you." And to Jairus, when Jairus finds out that his daughter has died, Jesus says, he says, "Just believe," is what he says. Excuse me, I struggle with words sometimes. And so what's the deal here? The idea of your faith healing you, and Jesus saying to Jairus, "Just believe." I think it's so easy for us to essentially have faith in faith. That faith is actually probably more closely related to what we think of as hope in English. Like, okay, well, I kind of think that this will probably work out for me, and so that's belief or that's faith. I think unfortunately a lot of Christians live this way. They will believe that just because, or they will think that just because they have a positive outlook on their future, their eternal life, that's faith and that's going to be enough for them. That's really not what faith is. Faith is well, the old theologians called it three things. They call it knowledge, assent, and trust. So knowledge is knowing the possibility, right? Knowing this person can do this thing. Assent is believing that's possible, right? And then third is actually putting my functional trust in it. And so the fact that this woman actually reached out and touched Jesus was her faith. It wasn't just that she knew that Jesus could heal her, it's that she went to him to be healed. And for Jairus, it's not just that he knew that Jesus could heal his daughter, but in that moment that he would have to put his functional trust in him. And that's actually, I think, part of the reason why Jesus doesn't immediately go to Jairus' daughter and get her before she dies. He wants Jairus to put his functional trust in him. And for us, that's important for us to think about as well. As we think about how we trust Jesus, do we trust Jesus in sort of the same way that we kind of trust that the weather is generally going to get better? Like, oh yeah, I hope it doesn't rain tomorrow. No, we have something far more certain. We have the words of Jesus, the accounts of Jesus, which allow us to be very certain that the things that Jesus says are true for us. And therefore, we can put our functional trust in them, and we can risk things like our emotions or our time or our energy or our money or any sort of resources that we have. Our comfort is a big one, right? We can put those things on the line for Jesus because we can functionally trust him. Last point then, right at the end here, is the idea of asleep, not dead. There's Martin Luther calls these things the sweet candy names of death. In other words, the Bible and the biblical authors, they use these words to describe death that are far more easy, soft than the actual word death in a lot of cases. And sleep is probably the most common one. That we would understand that when we die, it is like going to sleep. In the same way that when you are asleep, you are going to wake up and you are going to be refreshed and it is going to be a new day. When you die, you are going to wake up and you will be refreshed and it will be a new day of eternal life with God forever. And therefore, as the old hymn says, we ought to fear death as much as crawling into bed. And I don't know about you, but I love crawling into bed at the end of a night because I'm tired and I'm weary. And as I think about my death, I want to have that same attitude. That as I look forward to death, I am tired and weary of this life. But as I crawl into my grave, I know that I will wake up refreshed into a new life. And this girl, she got to experience it in a small way as Jesus raised her from the dead, but ultimately she's going to experience it as well, and so are you and I, when Jesus rises us out of our graves from the sleep that we had in death to a new life in heaven forever. Thanks for taking time to do this devotion with me. I look forward to catching you next time.